is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced Cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Indianapolis, Indiana, 2 hours west of where I live in west central Ohio, is a city probably best known around the country for auto racing and its professional sports teams. This city, with a metro population of just over 2 million, has a vibrant craft beer scene as well, however, one that has been steadily pulling in national and international awards. Metazoa Brewing won Brewery of the Year at the Great American Beer Festival in 2021 and has won numerous individual beer awards at GABF and at the World Beer Cup. Sun King has been similarly decorated on beer's biggest stages, and breweries like Moontown, Taxman, and Upland have won national awards as well. While the success of the craft beer scene in Indy is relatively recent, brewing in Indianapolis is not. Prior to Prohibition, some of the largest breweries in the country called the Circle City home, and several held international acclaim. Indy is often overlooked among the best beer cities of the Midwest, but a brand new book by an Indianapolis author with an auspicious last name aims to change that. In this episode, we talk with Amy Beers, the owner of the Drinking with Beers Indianapolis Beer Tour Company and the author of the new book, Indianapolis Beer Stories, History to Modern Craft in Circle City Brewing. Amy is a certified Cicerone, and we've been beer buddies for a few years now, periodically sending each other beer and co-hosting Instagram live tastings together. In this conversation, we discuss her book, The Invisible History of Indianapolis Beer Prior to Prohibition, and the vibrant modern beer scene in central Indiana.
I was born into this role basically because my last name is Beers, and that is really my name.
Yes. That's being born under the right sign.
I was born into the industry from birth. I have since become a certified Cicerone, and I give beer tours through my company called Drinking with Beers.
That's Amy Beers, the author of Indianapolis Beer Stories, which was just released on Monday, July 18th by the History Press. Amy leads tours through different neighborhoods of Indianapolis, highlighting the history of Indy's brewing scene and the flavors of its modern craft breweries, and her book is an enthusiastic guide to the Indy beer scene past and present. Amy does a great job of providing in-depth historical information while keeping the book engaging and relatable, highlighting the human side of the city's industrial brewing past. I sat down with Amy recently and asked her about the process of taking on such a daunting task. When I think about 19th century and early 20th century brewing in the U.S., I think about Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, the German Triangle. And I forget that right in the middle is Indianapolis. And you highlighted a couple breweries, Terre Haute and Indianapolis Brewing, that were some of the largest and most successful in the country, which I did not realize.
Right. It was very surprising things I learned about the Indianapolis Brewing Company and just how big and significant it was to the pre-Prohibition brewing era.
And it's just been wiped out from memory, seemingly.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, especially here, history buffs that are really big into the Indianapolis brewing history, are all pretty much aware of the Indianapolis Brewing Company. And, I kind of had a general idea about it before I started writing the book. But as I started writing, I really was able to delve into a lot of details. And it was just really fun uncovering kind of some of these lost stories.
Walk us through the research portion of working on this project. I mean, this is an incredible amount of information and a lot of detail.
Yeah. So in the very beginning, it's funny you mentioned all the detail and, covering a lot of ground. When I first was approached with this opportunity, I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to fill whole entire book dedicated just to Indianapolis brewing history. I mean, maybe Indiana, but no way Indianapolis. But as I started, digging into old texts, researching newspapers, interviewing people, I realized that there's no way I'm going to be able to fit all this. But I started researching before COVID hit, and I was going to the library, physically going and bringing back physical books to my house, just stacks of these old dusty books, some of them, 5 inches thick, multiple volumes, and started, looking back in the index, kind of skimming some pages, compiling an outline, kind of some keywords and key figures I thought would be interesting to research. And as I started researching these people and these events, I went down so many rabbit holes. It was so interesting to see how everything is so connected. And I also, was interviewing some key figures that are, still around today. It's not all just a book about dead people. um, but then when COVID hit and we weren't allowed to go to these libraries, right? So during that time, I discovered that a lot of these books and these newspapers have been archived online. I mean, it's more than a simple Google search. You really had to do some digging. But once I discovered these archived texts, it allowed me to get more detailed in my storytelling.
One thing that I've come across trying to research historical brewing information is that breweries didn't always keep a very good record of what they were doing. This was just daily work for them, and it didn't occur to them that 100 years later we would want all the details. Were you running into those kind of frustrating dead ends very often?
I mean, I didn't really find any old recipes. I didn't really find any kind of records of daily operations. I think the stories are more centered on the key figures in the brewing industry. It's more about the who and the why rather than the actual production of the beer. So I got a lot of juicy little tidbits out of newspapers mostly. The textbooks kind of would help me put things in context and kind of give a general thing. But then I really got really fun, nice tidbits in newspapers.
Yeah, there were some really interesting little human elements in here that provided some very personal context for these stories that could be kind of abstract. I mean, there's the one story of the fire, and the woman had to throw her children out the window and then jumps out in flames, like all these little things where it's like, my goodness, this is like a movie in the midst of all this historical information.
Yeah. So again, it's more than the beer and the brewing. It's just kind of these stories that relate to the brewing industry, help readers feel more connected and just kind of get a basic understanding for kind of who we were, how the brewing industry evolved, and how we got to where we are today. Because I think to really be able to appreciate where we are now, we have to understand all the work that was involved in getting to where we are today.
Were there particular stories that you really resonated with most personally while you were researching this?
I don't necessarily believe in reincarnation, but I really enjoyed writing about the pre-Prohibition era. I don't know. I just feel this weird connection to it. It's just this golden era of brewing, and just a lot of good stories came out of there. It just seems like such a romantic time. It was kind of this industrial revolution and the height of brewing and the height of Indianapolis in general. But I guess on a more personal level, I did a chapter about women in the brewing industry, largely centers around Elise Lane, who's the owner of Scarlet Lane, her story. But it also allowed me to write about kind of the context, like when Elise came on, what was the industry like then? I mean, because women definitely were the minority. I mean, we still are, but I really loved writing about some of the women who have broken barriers and defied expectations. And,
she has a really inspiring story on her own. I mean, the way she got into this, she didn't even realize this was an option that was open to her.
Right. And I kind of felt the same way at some point about writing. I've never really had any desire to be a brewer, but there was a point in my life where I was kind of in a transition with my career and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to work in beer in some capacity. So I started reading some books, and I came across this book that was written by Rita Cohn. There was a part where it mentioned in Indianapolis specifically. And I thought, who wrote this? How would they even know about this? Just to discover that it was a woman writing about beer and in the town that I live in kind of changed my mind about some things. So it's like, I kind of felt like, oh, maybe there's space for me here too. So, and Elisa's story is very similar. So I guess as far as a story that resonates with me personally, that's probably the closest.
What were some of the most surprising or unusual stories that you uncovered in your research?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers.
I would say I had a lot of fun learning about quote unquote the characters in my book, because these were real people, but they kind of started to feel like characters. And that was a lot of fun, just kind of getting to know them more intimately, and also interviewing all of the people who are in today's craft beer scene, getting to know their story. But as far as most surprising, just how significant the Indianapolis Brewing Company was. I mean, they were known throughout the world, but they also played a key role in helping build up the city. For example, in the late 1800s, Indiana experienced a gas boom, and it was considered to be almost like a gold rush for Indiana. And this was happening mostly on the east side of the state. And Indianapolis tapped into that supply via a pipeline, and that pipeline was able to be built largely due to donations from the breweries, and which ended up bringing a lot of wealth into the city. So just seeing that relationship of how the brewing scene, especially in the pre-Prohibition era, how much wealth it brought to the city, how much it really helped. A lot of our old buildings were built on beer money. And then also seeing how, beer helped shape the city as well. So just, I guess that relationship, it's something I never thought about before. I don't know. It's just not something that I feel like is talked about. Mm-hmm. I feel like the brewing history has kind of just been swept under the rug, and it just had such a major impact on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think it has everywhere. I feel like the United States does not realize the significance of the brewing industry before Prohibition.
Right. There was a quote in my book, I don't know if I can find it, but it was basically talking about that relationship. But it mentioned how the Indianapolis Brewing Company, I think it was in 1900 or 1905, it won grand prize gold at the World's Fair. It was the highest honor at the time. This is before the World Beer Cup, before Great American Beer Festival. This was it. And they won the highest honor. And I mean, they distributed their beer all over the world.
That was the Dusseldorfer beer?
Yes.
They won for it. Was that an alt beer? I didn't see in there. It was just called like Dusseldorfer Ale or something, but I assume that would be an alt beer.
I would imagine that's probably the closest.
Yeah. They
brewed it with coffee too. So I imagine it was a dark.
You just dropped that sentence in there. I'm like, wait, what? Like, as I was reading the book, because Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist, is what, the son or grandson of one of the brewery owners. And he revealed that they used coffee.
Yes.
That was not known. Like, they were not saying there was coffee in it.
I don't think so. It was like a secret ingredient, but enough time had passed, I think. And the brewery didn't really exist at that time. So Kurt was like, plus he didn't really like his, Albert Lieber was his grandfather. He didn't really like him. So he was just like, I'm going to tell your secrets because I don't like you very much.
Sure. That seems like a Kurt Vonnegut thing to do.
Yes. We were kind of a big deal. I'm just saying. Also, I was surprised to learn that Budweiser, speaking of major breweries, that Budweiser had a branch here in Indianapolis.
Yeah. There were a few others, right, that came over.
Yeah. I think Pabst.
Schlitz came down.
Yeah. Schlitz.
One thing I thought was interesting, looking at the more things change, the more they stay the same, was in the last week, we've gotten the news of Stone Brewing being purchased by Sapporo out of Japan. And that's after Stone Brewing has spent years and years marketing themselves on independence, and we will never sell to corporate beer. And there was a brewery in here, I think it was Home Brewing. Yeah, so you say the Home Brewing Company had been formed in passionate rebellion against foreign capital. However, perhaps passion and emotion stood in the way of a well thought out business decision. And it felt like, this is 100 years have passed and the craft movement has taken off and all this stuff, but it's still the same thing. When you base your brand around the image of being a rebel and independence, but then you grow to a certain size, you really can't maintain it. And that lesson hasn't been learned, apparently.
Right. Well, I thought, you start out in the early days of Indianapolis, and just kind of also that you can apply this to other places as well. You have these small artisanal breweries, and then you have the, Industrial Revolution, and they started commercializing beer, and these breweries just grew to such proportions. And you're right, it gets to a point where it's like they can't really grow it anymore, or there's just the market is so oversaturated and there's all this competition. So speaking of that foreign investment capital, in the book I write about how these British syndicates were buying up all these breweries, and America in general is still growing, and we kind of hit this wall, and a lot of people felt like we could really use this additional capital to kind of further grow. And then also because the market was so oversaturated at the time, it was a way to get more, investment capital, but also merging helps reduce competition. And I feel like that's kind of, if history comes full circle, it's like the craft beer movement was like the early taverns, and you have all these small artisanal breweries, but now it's grown to such a point where it's like a lot of breweries feel like, well, if we're going to keep going, we have this offer. It just kind of, I guess it's just the ebb and flow of life.
Well, so much of the identity has been based on the idea of being the little guy and the independence and the hands-on craftsmanship and all that. And, it was all about that identity stuff and that image. And eventually those things can't necessarily stay true anymore when you get to a certain size. Like what does independence mean when you're brewing 2 million barrels a year?
Right.
What does being a small brewery mean at that point?
This is the conundrum. Like, we want our small little breweries to be successful, but to what point?
It's like loving a band and then saying they sell out when everybody else starts liking them too.
Right, exactly. Because they want to keep up with demand. And in order to do that, you have to expand. Yeah. I feel like there's not really any win. Yeah. I don't know. I guess it just depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It is. It's not really it's
not a cut and dry thing. Well, let's talk about the modern Indianapolis beer scene. Give us kind of an overview introduction of beer in your city today.
Oh, gosh. So the modern craft beer scene, John Hill was the first to open a brew pub in Indiana in 1990. And then it just kind of grew from there. And for a while, especially in the 90s, it was kind of the heyday of the brew pub, which is more of a, restaurant that brews beer for the restaurant rather than existing as a production brewery. And then you have Sun King that came along. Originally, they wanted to do a brew pub, but long story short, they ended up just opening a production brewery, and then it kind of all grew from there. Everyone knows everyone. It's all connected. It's very much a sense of community.
Sure. What would you say are some of the highlight breweries that people should hit if they're coming to Indianapolis?
Well, definitely you have to go to Sun King because they're Sun King, but also Metazoa Brewery is up there. They had a really big year last year. They won Brewery of the Year at both I believe it was the Great American Beer Festival and the Indiana State Brewers Cup. I really love their Hop Eponymous IPA, constantly putting out new stuff. They actually just expanded into a larger facility, and they're going to start doing more pre-prohibition style lagers, which is exciting. Yeah. And then, of course, they donate 5% of their profits to animals. If you're into history, definitely visit Indiana City Brewery, it's the last remaining building of Indy's pre-prohibition era. It used to be the bottling plant of the home brewing company. It was a whole big complex, and much of it has been demolished, but the bottling plant still remains, and that was built in 1904. That's a really cool space. Of course, you have to go to the Broad Ripple Brew Pub, since they were kind of the first in Indiana.
Yeah. Are there neighborhoods that are good concentrations of breweries? You mentioned Broad Ripple. Like, what else?
Broad Ripple, it used to be, but now it's just the Broad Ripple Brew Pub. But it's so the Broad Ripple Brew Pub, you could spend a day or an afternoon in Broad Ripple. There's the Monon Trail, which is it used to be a railroad track that's been paved over into a pedestrian pathway, and the brew pub's located just along there, so it makes a really nice bike ride, a really nice walk. You can stop off and have a proper English pint. Fountain Square is a good neighborhood. It has Upland. It has the Fountain Square Brewery, which is one of the first production breweries in Indianapolis. There's Chili Water, which is great. They're putting out some really nice lagers. They're located along the Cultural Trail. They have a really nice patio. It makes for really good people watching. And the Metazoa is not too far from there. And then if you don't mind walking a stretch, Taxman Cityway is near there as well.
Taxman is one of my favorite Indiana breweries, and they're kind of unique with their specializing in Belgian beers.
Yep.
They've got 4 locations?
Yeah, I think 4. Their original location is in Bargersville, and then Cityway is their newest, and it's in this old livery building. It's a really neat space.
You mentioned Scarlet Lane. Can you give a little bit of a personality overview of that brewery? They have a very specific theme.
Yes, they are all about the macabre. It's Halloween year round. And it's female majority owned, so it's nice to go there. She makes some really great beer. Probably most famous for her Dorian Stout. It's her baby. It's inspired from the book, what's the title?
Portrait of Dorian Gray.
Yes.
And they deliver their beer in a hearse.
They do. They do. And then at beer festivals, they have a coffin that they have made into a kegerator, a tap that they pour beer from. And it's a lot of fun. It's Halloween decorations year round. It's very unique.
One beer that I really enjoy out of Indiana that has a historical connection is Champagne Velvet, which is brewed now by Upland. But can you talk a little bit about that historical connection with that beer?
Terre Haute Brewery was the original brewery to brew Champagne Velvet. That brewery opened in 1837, but they didn't start making Champagne Velvet until 1902, and it was developed by a German immigrant. For a time, the Terre Haute Brewery was the seventh, around the turn of the century, it was the seventh largest brewery in the United States. And they had really close ties with the Indianapolis Brewing Company. And then Prohibition happened and things kind of got wonky. And I think the recipe kind of got lost. And it wasn't until I think it was the 90s that Terre Haute resident dug it up.
Oh, wow.
And then the rights got sold to Upland. So Upland Brewery now makes it.
And are they brewing that as close to that recipe as they can?
I believe so. I would imagine that they're doing it as close to the original as possible.
Well, what are Amy Beer's Desert Island Indianapolis beers? What are your favorites that you keep if you lose everything else?
Well, you have to have a good Pilsner as a go-to. But my go-to Pilsner in Indianapolis is Built to Last by Chili Water. And their Dunkel is really good too. It's the Dark Side of the Munich. Those are probably my two go-tos there. Oh, I love the two of Tarts at Upland. They won, I believe it was a gold medal at the World Beer Cup a few years ago. That's a really nice kettle sour. And but it's not too sour. It's just like a very nice, refreshing. Gosh, Upland has some really nice sours. I mean, like you said, Taxman has a really great Belgian-inspired sour program as well. Metazoa, their Hippopotamus is good if you like IPA. I mean, I love everything. I recently had this. So Sun King has a really nice barrel program, and they put out their King's Reserve series. I recently had their Polynesian Passion. It was so good. I was giving a tour, actually. I had it, and then I went back like a week later to try to buy a 2-pack, and it was already gone. It was tiki inspired, so it had some passion fruit, and it was a barrel aged beer. It was just so good. But I feel like everything of their King's Reserve series is so good. In the fall time, they have a caramel apple triple, which is really good.
Do you have a favorite from Scarlet Lane?
Their Dorian Stout, the coconut version, is really good.
So what are some essential beer experiences if somebody is visiting Indianapolis?
Can I give a shameless self-plug?
Absolutely.
Tell people to take my tours.
Yes. Tell us about your tour. What happens?
You really have to come experience the Drinking with Beers beer tours. So there are walking tours, and one tour is in Fountain Square. It's evolution of craft beer in Indianapolis. And the other one is in Mass Ave, and it's called Taste of Europe. And I've curated all the beer on the list. I weave in some history. It's just a really fun time to try something new and gain a deeper appreciation for the beer that you're drinking. Also, something really exciting that is happening, Newfield, the art museum, is kind of actually a whole cultural complex, but they just opened their brand new beer garden. And it's just a beautiful beer garden. And LJ, Lindsay Joe, was the second Cicerone to become certified in Indianapolis, and she curated all the beer for that. She has some really nice German imports as well as some local. That would be another top experience for beer lovers coming to Indy. Second only, of course, to my tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to get over there and take the tour sometime. I
Yes.
do love Fountain Square. It's a beautiful little neighborhood.
It is. It's so fun. It's like this, you have Mass Ave, which is kind of like the trendy part of town. You have that new Bottleworks district, and it's a fun time. St. Joseph Brewery is close to there, but Fountain Square to me is kind of like the quirky cousin to Mass Ave. It's like, I like to call it Indy's little Bohemia.
Yeah, it feels a little overlooked.
I think so. There's a lot of nice independent shops and restaurants, and of course, there's some fantastic breweries all within walking distance. You can really make a whole day of it. Or just book my tour and I'll take you around for a couple hours and tell you about everything.
All right, Amy. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
I'm happy to confirm that Indianapolis is full of fantastic beer. Upland's Champagne Velvet is one of my favorite summer patio beers, and Taxman brews some of the best Belgian ales this side of the Atlantic. Sun King's beers are consistently excellent, and I recently got to try Moontown for the first time and found their Schoolhouse Bock and Bright Side of the Moon to be fantastic. And as an unrepentant lifelong fan of all things horror, I love pretty much everything about Scarlet Lane, so keep an eye out for more about them here in the coming months. You can purchase Indianapolis Beer Stories, History to Modern Craft, and Circle City Brewing wherever books are sold. Please prioritize indie booksellers if you can. And you can find out more about Drinking with Beers, tours for the beer curious, at Amy's website, drinkingwithbeers.com. I'll put all the links in the show notes, as well as the link to order tickets for my Autumn in Belgium virtual tasting. Thanks again to my friend Amy Beers for coming on the show, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.